So I'm here with Sophie Mendelsohn, who is a psychoanalyst and author from Paris, and also Sinziana Ravini, who's also a psychoanalyst and author from Paris. And I thought we were going to discuss the new book by Sophie here, which is also a co-authored book. So
yes.
The other author isn't here, but maybe we can represent him somehow. I'm sorry for this. But before we come to the book, I thought we'd say something about you're working with something called the Collectif Pantin, which is like a group, and I guess it's connected to the area as well.
Yeah, because we are in Pantin now.
Yeah, maybe you can say something about the work you do.
Sure. This book is actually connected to this Collectif de Pantin, which was founded 4 years ago in 2018. When we realized with some colleagues that our patients were starting to talk a lot about race, racialization, racism in the French context where we are, in Paris or in the suburbs of Paris. And we realized that we didn't have the tools to really listen and make exist problematics that they were raising. And so we decided to gather some people who were interested in that, which is not quite common in the French context, where we tend to be colorblind and to have a conception of universalism, which is in the French tradition, in the French Republican tradition, and that tends to lower the differences within the national narration. So even though we are, France is a former colonial empire, one of the most important in Europe, besides the British Empire, of course, but which was held in a very different, with very different politics, and the French history of colonialism has been mainly ignored by most people, some specialists, of course, and especially in the recent times have focused on the outcomes of the end of the French Empire, but it's quite uncommon to consider this as a main factor of the social French social composition now. So because these patients were addressing us these issues, we felt interpelled and obliged to take that into account and to build our own tools, partly by importing concepts from the Anglo-Saxon world, where it's a lot more developed, and partly by scrutinizing the French history and the very thin tradition we have, starting with this psychoanalyst whose name is Octave Mannoni, who was a friend of Frantz Fanon, but an ignored friend and a complex friend, because they had fights together, but they were very close too, at the same time as they were fighting. And so we started to look back to this tradition, which was totally made invisible in the recent psychoanalysis trends. So that's how it started.
I mean, the book is called, in translation, the psychological life of racism.
Psychic life.
Psychic is a bit weird.
Yeah,
it sounds like superstition in English.
Yeah. Psychic is different. Yeah.
No, but it also has this subtitle, the empire of word démentir,
denial or disavowal. Yeah. It's both in English.
But you have a discussion interview about how to translate this word. Is Freud's Verleugnung, which is
the German word is Verleugnung.
But you chose this particular translation. Can you just begin there and say démentir?
Yes, sure. It's the starting point is the Freudian concept of denial. This is the traditional translation into English, and déni in French, so it's very close to the English translation. And this concept was elaborated by Freud in the 20s when he started to theorize the perversion and more specifically fetishism in the area in the perversion zone. And he realized that besides Verdrängung, so the refoulement, and of course the English word is escaping me now. Repression, thank you. Besides repression, there was another very important process of defense, which he called denial. And at first he only connected it to fetishism and perversion, but then he started to realize that it was a quite common way of defend oneself against what he calls castration. So, the realization that the person who to whom you give all the power is more powerless than you would like to think to, and so it's mainly an analysis of the kind of relationship between child and mother. And the mother being the most powerful character in the life of the child, so it's important for the child that the mother keep this power, and realizing that she actually doesn't have the power that you concede to her is quite traumatic, and so you defend yourself against this kind of trauma. That's the Freudian word, actually. This is a traumatic knowledge. And against this traumatic knowledge, you build a belief, and a belief which is contradictory to the knowledge which is imposed to you. But both can exist side by side in the contradiction without destroying either the knowledge nor the belief. So this psychanalyst I mentioned, Octave Mannoni, wrote a very important article in '64 in Les Temps Modernes, so this very famous review held by Jean-Paul Sartre. And in this article, Octave Mannoni, the article is entitled Je sais bien mais quand même. So this is the formula of the disavowal.
I know very well, but still.
Yeah,
Which is a form of denial.
Exactly. That's the core formula of the denial. But he's embarrassed with translation from the German word, and he tends to either use the German word because the French translation doesn't really doesn't really give access, to the complexity of the process, which is that the real is imposing to you a realization that you don't want. So there is a disavowal to your belief, which is built up by the reality, and in response to that, you deny the disavowal. So it's a complex and dialectic process of being frustrated to the point of trauma by reality, and reacting to that by denying the disavowal you're confronted to. So,
but I'm just going to ask one question since we were mentioning Octave Mannoni, because I mean Frantz Fanon is very famous also in Sweden. Everyone reads him, but Mannoni is I knew of him, or Maud Mannoni, which is
Maud Mannoni is the wife of
I've only read Maud Mannoni.
Yeah, she was associated to anti-psychiatric movement in Europe, but in the 60s.
But maybe you can just give us a brief account.
Sure. Octave Mannoni was first a philosophy teacher in the lycée, in secondary schools, but in the colonial world, French world. So first in Martinique, but he didn't meet Fanon there, and then in Madagascar. So he spent 25 years of his life, of his teaching life, in the French colonial empire. So he was a very good observer of the what he finally called the colonial situation. So the intrication, the specific power relations that are built in this context. And when he, at the end of his stay in Madagascar, he started to he started psychoanalysis with Jacques Lacan. Came back to, in France, of course, in Paris, came back to Madagascar for a while and started to really, at the end of the 40s, to really develop a psychoanalytic conceptualization of the colonial life, colonial subjectivation. And so when he published in 1950 his book, it was the first time ever that in the French context that someone was interested and was also able to analyze the colonial situation from with the psychological from a psychological angle, so the psychological determinations of the colonial situations, and the anti-colonialists of the time, so Aimé Césaire, Frantz Fanon, and other people were really mad at him because they were all Marxist at the time, and you know, the psychological life or the unconscious life was out of the scope for them, and it was lowering the political issues to consider these questions, these colonial issues from this angle. So he was not read, Octave Mannoni, in France. But what is interesting, it's a little bit like Fanon, because he was translated really early in the United States, as Fanon was, and he came back from the United States after having a career, in a way, there. He was read again in France because people started to use his tools to produce more critical analysis about racism and the unconscious determinations of racism.
One person that used his tools was Fanon. You are writing about the fact that Peau Noire, Masque Blanche was taken from Mannoni. But you're also writing about the decolonization of the self that Mannoni was fighting for. Can you explain us how that relates to the Oedipus complex?
Sure. It's a fascinating article that he wrote after the one about denial in 1964. In 1966, he publishes I think it's the only original article that he published in English in a review called Race, and the article is entitled "The Decolonization of Myself." And so in 1966, which is quite avant-garde because I don't think many people were considering this question at the time. I mean, the subjective, decolonization in the subjective area and not in the political area.
Can I start something? Sure. I thought about it. It's a slightly weird title. You know, we say the decolonization of the self. but not of myself.
Myself, yeah.
What is it about myself?
because it's.
What does it mean? Can you explain?
Yeah, it's autobiographical. Totally, he's taking himself. It's also an example of situated epistemology or standpoint epistemology. A long time before
the 70s.
Yeah. Well, not a long time before the 70s, but before it started to really develop in social sciences. So his point is to say that after, so he came back from Madagascar in 50 when his book was published, and then he started to work in Paris as a psychoanalyst. He changed his career from philosophy teacher to psychoanalyst, practicing psychoanalyst. And so some 15 years later, he realized that he was keeping in himself a lot of this inheritance from this colonial world, and he started to deconstruct really all the determinations he was still holding from this long time experience he had. So the idea for him is to divorce from the Sartrean way of saying things. It's very famous, you know, the Sartre position about, you know, the Jew only exists in the eye of the anti-Semitic. So he really divorced from this perspective, saying that, for example, if I have a Jew patient and this person is starting to explain how is what kind of difficulties he has with his being Jew after World War II, after Shoah, of course. What would be the effect to just tell him, you know, you don't exist as a Jew, you know, you only exist in the eye, as such, in the eye of the anti-Semitic. That was not possible for him to go on with this kind of perspective. So he really shifted to the point of taking into account differences, racial differences also. Well, in the case of the Jew, it was conceived as a race difference, so, and not religious difference. So the idea for him was to be able to deconstruct the hearing and the vision of the patients we have, to admit and welcome the saying of, you know, these differences that from which the person is talking, and from which you can really capture the singularity of a speech, and without that, without taking that into account, his idea was that you miss in the field of psychoanalysis, of practicing psychoanalysis, you miss the core of singular speech. So you know, everything is what can you do without that? You're just, you know, you pay attention only to structures, to diagnosis, to, you know, this of course Oedipus complex as, you know, the knot of conflicts, but, you know, totally universalized from a white and of course patriarchal point of view. So the only way to get out of this trap, because then you hear you just hear the same discourse all the time if you don't break up with this
how can
conception.
one get out of the trap? How is it possible to get out of the Oedipal trap?
Exactly.
Can you give us some examples?
Well, the example he gives is that is about this Jewish patient, and you know, just taking seriously the fact that when someone is talking about a local or
like the Malgache, when he speaks about
like the Malgache, of course, or even recently I was working on the movies by a French black movie maker whose name is Alice Diop, and she was saying something that really interested me, which was that it was very striking to her to see that a whole tradition is repeating itself. So she was feeling she was bégayée, stuttering. She was stuttering because all the moves that are made to make visible the kind of life, the kind of subjectivities you have when you come from this experience, being the daughter or the granddaughter of immigrants from the French Empire. These are not these experiments or these works or these speeches. It's as if they would vanish in the air as soon as they appear. So it leaves no traces. So she realized, being a filmmaker and watching the work of others, that the questions that interest her now were already developed in the 70s, for example, and she didn't have access to that because it's not accessible. So so it's very interesting to see, to think about how it disappeared, how these works did not leave any traces that can be used for the people who come after, and how we could change this today by restructuring in some way the public audience for these questions. And it's a French symptom, really, that the works coming from these experiments are just, you know, except if you are Albert Camus and you have the Nobel Prize of Literature, then you're forgotten, and your work doesn't serve anyone. So I think it's a very interesting question for our time when, for example, this year, Emmanuel Macron, so the French president, held a lot of ceremonies, memorial ceremonies aimed toward, you know, making this memory alive again in such a manner that exactly it reproduces the lack of traces, the lack of it doesn't build up a common ground on which we could, you know, think together about what we can do today, 3-4 generations after, what we can do of this inheritance.
I wanted to ask something. I mean, I'm reading your book. It's a theoretical book, but it also traces the history of French psychoanalysis. So I wanted to ask something that is, you know, about the particular French quality of it. I mean, obviously, I mean, you say that there is a reluctance in the French tradition, but I would say it's also in Germany, you know, a reluctance in psychoanalysis to deal with the question of racism. And you even go to say it's a kind of ban on thinking, a Denkverbot. You have various reasons for this. I mean, why is there such a Denkverbot?
Well, our main hypothesis about that was that there is a French tradition which thinks anti-Semitism apart from racism, and there are reasons for that because, for example, in the French Algeria, in 42, 43, the Jews lost the French citizenship they had won for not being Muslims and Arabic in the century before. So in 1870, they won the great honor of becoming French citizens, which they were not. They were living on this territory for years and even centuries. So, but it was a colonial strategy to put apart segments of population that could, if they would be together, there would be a counterpower that was very important to break up before it could become dangerous for the colonial government. And this is, to my eyes, symptomatic of the post-colonial times. After the independence of Algeria, the figure of the Arab man, specifically the Arab man, was built up as a very dangerous character, sexually, exactly as Fanon was putting it in the former colonial empire. So the fantasies of the sexual power of the racialized man was very strong, and it was important to keep apart this segment of populations. Even though very recently Serge Klarsfeld, who is a very important figure of the Jewish world after the French Jewish world after the Shoah, said that the Muslims are the Jews of yesterday. The Muslims are today the Jews of yesterday. That the fact that someone like him could say that is really important to realize what kind of gouvernement des populations, to say it with Foucault, is held in the post-colonial times. So I think the hypothesis we had with Livio Boni, my co-author, the hypothesis we had is that the question of the Jewishness of psychoanalysis was could function as a bouclier, as a shield against the taking into account of the other figures of racism, like the Arab man in the 70s, for example, or the 80s. So that was one of the hypotheses we have. So to explain the fact that racism was not possible to. But just one thing which struck me really as fascinating. I saw a movie, a documentary movie, filmed in 5 years ago, something like that, which is called Black Psychoanalysts Speak. So in the U.S. And even in the context of the U.S., so these black psychoanalysts were saying that racial issues, the question of race, was never in their own analysis a question that could be developed within their own psychoanalysis. So it's quite.
Do you think it's Freud's fault? Thank you. fault. Because as you say at the beginning, Freud never really spoke about race. When he spoke about race, he said race as a people. And if so, why do you think that's the blind spot within his thinking? Because he wrote Totem and Taboo, and he tried to divide humanity into these three stages.
Yeah, sure.
Like animism, then religious times, and then science.
Sure. But it's based on the anthropology of the 19th century. It was not really enlightened to, for example, but of course it was just starting at the time. The Frankfurt School, for example, which really had a critical view on this kind of anthropological methods. He was out of it, and I think it's we should be careful not to apply, to his 19th century-ish way of saying things the way we see them now in the 21st century. But for sure, he didn't help opening this question. It's through culturalist psychoanalysis in the US in the 50s that these issues could be really raised, and not by Freud himself. It's I think it's complicated to attribute him the fault of not being able to
speak about how love and hate are combined, and how we construct the idea of the other as someone who can be dangerous to us. So in that way, perhaps it was a way to speak about racism. And the fact is that he experienced it himself. Exactly. I mean, he was exiled to London because he couldn't stay, and he was a forced exile. He didn't want to leave, of course. So he experienced it through anti-Semitism, but he had not. He was not prone to think these colonial issues. Also because Middle Europe at that time was not really concerned with that the same way we were. So,
but in the book you also have another. I mean, you have several reasons why, as it were, French psychoanalysis would not deal with it. Yeah. Another one is perhaps not about Freud, but a more French, about Lacan and the existence of language, which you say somehow deny or repress history.
Well, it's ambiguous because at the same time, structuralism and the way the focus on signifiant and the linguistic turn didn't help taking into account this social context and Lacan's family was involved in anti-colonialist struggles. His own stepdaughter, the daughter of Bataille. She was really into the struggle against French Algeria. So he was not completely strange to that, but it's not before the beginning of the 70s that he really starts and through an economic angle, through a Marxist angle about the subjective effect of the common market and the beginning of mondialization. How do you say that? Globalization. Thank you.
You have a really interesting discussion about the idea of jouissance in Lacan, and he says somewhere in 72, I think, that no racism has a future because it involves jouissance.
Exactly. So his idea at that time, which is quite. Which comes quite late because he was there from the 30s, so he could have entered that before, but this is at the moment where he theorized the discourse at the same time as Foucault, but in another way. And when in his teaching the concept of jouissance, so Lust, I don't know.
Another untranslatable word. It doesn't work in that language.
So that one more. We are dealing with a lot of untranslatable words. So that's at that moment he starts to not develop, because it's only a few mentions, very scattered. He develops, he doesn't develop, but he just mentions the idea that in the context where he is at that time, so in the post-colonial context of the 70s, early 70s, we inherit something which is new to his eyes, which is that we have new fantasy fantasies. Donc, fantasy is connected to jouissance for him because it sustains the exercice of jouissance. So fantasies are new in this post-colonial context because populations are mixed up in a way that was unthinkable before this modern type of colonization. And we inherit that in a context where the global market or the common market, at the time more than global, the common market is pushing people to the realization of their own fantasies. So the context of this new liberal capitalism of the time gives rise to the idea that all the fantasies are possible. You know, the jouir sans entrave,
and also cultural fantasies.
Yeah.
And differences, because you say that Lacan also explains why this doesn't create unity. Globalization doesn't create unity, but creates desire to actually reproduce difference instead.
Yeah, and in the mode of accentuated, maximized segregation
and singularity, so, which is a paradox actually. It doesn't bring us closer together, but on the other hand.
Because everyone is pushed back toward cultivating fantasies that are the outcome of this mixing of population. So racial fantasies that are necessary to ensure each one that in this time of globalization you still have your own jouissance. Here to be
secured.
To be secured. So the idea is that the segregation that it produces, each one with its own fantasy, is maximized by this context at that time. So it's true that we can consider this these scattered mentions as very inspiring for us now.
There's an interview or film somewhere where you explain the study by jouissance by speaking about the restitution of artworks. When you give artworks back to, Can you explain that example again?
Yes, sure. Yeah, there was a debate in France because, of course, the artworks of the colonial empire were taken into the museum of the center, so the Occidental museums, and when the critical consciousness started to get more acute in the recent years, it appeared to some people that it would not be possible to keep these artworks as if as if it were ours without in a naive way. So when the social sciences, I would say that in France it started really in mid 2005 when we had very important riots in the suburbs not far from here, and the consciousness started to get more acute about this question of the way post-colony is really is a reality, is a French social reality. So, and discriminations, and it's very still common to say that France is not racist, and there is no racism in France, even though you have someone like Zemmour who is openly and for the last presidential campaign openly claiming for totally racist, perspectives, but still we're not racist. So when it started to get bigger in the art world, people wanted to do something about that. So Macron asks for some, comment on dit, une
restitution.
Yeah, no, c'est Bénédicte Savoie et Felwine Sarr, so two art historians, one from Africa and one from here, Bénédicte Savoie. He asked them to write a study about how we could give back, what would be the condition for that. And it's very interesting because the debate was of a colonial style at that moment, because okay, but we are the ones who know how to to keep this artwork, to give it the importance it has, to show it in the right museums and institutions. We know how to talk about it, because the one who to whom they belong, that they won't know what to do with it. So they don't even have museums to put them. So they will be destroyed if we give back the artwork to them. So it's very interesting to see that. Even when you have the goodwill to address these questions, the spontaneous debate around that is still of colonial inspiration. So yeah.
I wanted to ask perhaps a more general question. I mean, if you're coming from Sweden, or being trained in analytic philosophy, which I thank God abandoned after a while, psychoanalysis is really on the margins of philosophy.
Yeah.
Even in Germany, I would say the psychoanalysis, obviously the Frankfurt School, Benjamin Adorno, some people a little bit Habermas, but not really. It's not really central.
Yeah.
But in France, it's at least since just after the war, maybe because of the influence of Lacan later on, but still even before the war. I mean, psychoanalysis is always part of French philosophy.
Not before the Second World War. No, it's really Lacan who gave it this impulse. In the social science.
Is this still the case? Would you say it's still the case?
No.
No?
We lost the battle. And
to biology and neuroscience and
yes, like everywhere else. But still, we still have this tradition of, and it's actually revitalizing thanks to people like Sinziana and others. But I think about this.
Philosophers like today, we are friends with Silvia Lippi, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Her partner.
Patrice Manigliani,
and also Mehdi Belhaj-Kassem, Kenta Mayassou. They are interested in the real.
No, it's funny to see that, because after
restarting, it has been a long
exactly
gap,
after Lacan's death in '81, there was a long winter, because also for one reason, because not anyone is Lacan, and one must say, and to have this ability to connect with almost all the social sciences, and even some hard sciences like mathematics, topology, and logics, and so it's not given to anyone. So people after him lost the possibility to be part of the dance, right? And it's coming back now, but it's quite recent here, and psychoanalysis here lost his credit, his social credit, for sure, for a long time. But it's coming back through history mainly and anthropology, both.
But I think more, let's say, in a more, I mean, this is one of the things we will try to define. Where is French philosophy today? It's a very open question. I don't.
Okay.
I have no
I'm not
idea
sure
where
I can answer that.
No, but I mean, think about philosophy, at least in the French tradition, coming out of phenomenology, then critique of phenomenology, and other forms of theory of subjectivity, which is a key feature, at least. I mean, regardless of where you are, the question of the subject, regardless if you're Deleuze or Badiou, Derrida or Foucault, it will be there in some sense.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there will always be a psychoanalytic dimension to philosophy, because it asks the question about desires, the subject experience, which is always dealt with by psychoanalysis. So But I mean, perhaps the influence from biology and neuroscience and cognitive science have simply evacuated or pushed psychoanalysis to the side.
But you're right. Through philosophy, it could come back because there is no possibility for philosophy not to think the subjective problems. So subjectivity as a problem.
Accepting the claims, as I see it, this is my personal view, but accepting the claims of those sciences would also mean to push philosophy aside.
Yeah.
So psychoanalysis would go out with philosophy in that case.
And that's also why at the Collectif de Pantin we started to try to rebuild a possible association with philosophy. We did it with a philosopher whose name is Etienne Balibar, you might know, and because he was one of the first in the 80s to really start to think about racism. He did it with Emmanuel Wallenstein afterwards, but he started by himself in the French post-colonial context, and so it was very important for us to try to connect to the proposals he had quite early, and so we are attentive to this.
Do you think, Balibar claims that we left racism for ethnocentrism, and then we left ethnocentrism for culturalism, and that we're still there, and that racism is quite present in the way we speak about cultures today? I think it is what he calls racism without racism, and that's exactly how the Zemmour's discourse is exactly on that line. So it's not that Arabs or Muslims are a race, but they have a culture that is incompatible with ours, so with the white culture. So we should go back to separation, and that's also what Lacan said. The separations we did, we cannot do it again. So it's also that which is very complicated and create this kind of nostalgia, for a world where separations of races and cultures was still possible, and it's not anymore. So there is this, Afro-pessimism in the US is also working on this question. There is no going back to any, imaginary origin. There is no coming back to, before the mixing of population. So what do we do with that? Would you then say that those that are looking for liquid identities and are into queer now, in transgender questions, are trying to resolve this separatism, cultural separatism that we have been dealing with?
I wouldn't say resolve. I would rather say that they are taking that as a fact and moving forward from there. But it's very interesting to see that the more the queer discourse is in the public space, the more violent is the reaction against it. So as you can see now in the US, and the abortion is a key fight against this possibility of having your own body and your body, your right. It's which is fundamental to the queer history, because if you cannot dispose of your body, then you cannot do anything specific with it, and this is more about that. I think the power struggle between one progressive axis and the conservative one, which is fighting against it. All the more that the queer discourse is more powerful now, so has a bigger audience at least.
So perhaps one can say psychoanalysis can be transformed and merged with other disciplines, and because I'm saying that because it also says volume 1 on that. It's volume 1, and there'll be volume 2 or 3.
I hope so. And
I heard the interview on YouTube. Maybe you're going to do work on China or psychoanalysis. And other
we're actually working on that now with Livio again, which is who is my partner in crime, Eternal. We're working working on an atlas on psychoanalysis in the global south. So how non-Occidental cultures could find a way to grab, the psychoanalytical proposition of, the subject of the unconscious in a way that they would serve their own interests, and they would, modify also the doxa to their own use, and what are the back effects on the center of on the white world of this, heterodoxic use of psychoanalysis. So we work on that now.
So that's I think it's a a very important question and also a very tricky one. The same thing applies to philosophy, because if one would study psychoanalysis and it moves, it migrates to another culture, which surely has no legend about Oedipus or Antigone or something else. They have different set of concepts and different set of philosophical terms.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a certain risk of some kind of weird colonialism that psychoanalysis would have imposed.
Exactly,
of course. But also the risk that it must simply lose its specificity. I mean, how does one negotiate this migration of terms in philosophy?
Yeah, you're right. I think it's more. We should probably leave this way of saying things and fearing to lose our specificity or our purity, and just let because disciplines are alive, so we shouldn't be afraid of losing. But
when you get it back, you won't recognize it.
Yeah, but but maybe it will be more adjusted to the world we live in, and because it's also very illusory to think that we can just have our own little field and be quiet and calm there and not looking aside to know what is going on with our own concept. Okay, well, maybe it could give rise to very interesting discussions. We could have battles or at least disputes, and that would be interesting anyway. But saying to the people who use psychoanalysis in another way, like they do in China, it's something completely different. That they just lost track with psychoanalysis itself, and that I think we have to. It's a time for living our ideals and ideals of purity specifically, and try to find new ways to discuss with people who use, and they have their own reason to use this concept or this practice. So I'm very curious to
see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to wait for the 2 more volumes.
I have a question about a final.
No, maybe we can.
I have a question from a clinical perspective as a psychoanalyst myself. I'm so curious on how you work with xenophobia. How do you work with trying to cure that, and do you think it's curable, and what are your techniques?
I don't think actually, we had an occasion recently with Livio to talk about that. This book is not aimed to change the racism of others. I mean, it's aimed to give an idea of the history of this question in the psychoanalytic world, and it's aimed also to invite people, psychoanalysts specifically, to listen to things in another manner. So that's we don't claim to cure racist psychoanalysts, for example, and we don't even claim to cure racist patients. I have patients who tell very racist, things, and I think we should. I mean, there is no ideology there when I do. I'm not going to answer to someone who tells me really racist.
But do you react, or at least?
No, but I don't think we can react directly. I think it's on the side, and you know, having the possibility to what is the meaning of this? What is the function of this racist discourse, and how is it connected to this feeling, this fear of losing your own identity, and being feeling attacked by the culture of others, as you said. So the idea is more to reposition the way you listen to these questions, and be open to the possibility that this the conflicts which are in this area could express themselves more than say, and not Denkverbot, so and not saying that this shouldn't exist and this has no importance for psychoanalysis, and race on the contrary of gender or class doesn't exist, and which is very weird if you think about it 5 minutes. Why should gender and class exist and not race, as we really well know that it's a social determination as well as the others? So that's more taking that into account. So we reposition ourselves in front of this question, and it starts to exist differently if you accept that it's very simple clinical move.
I think, as you say, not reacting and perhaps not even judging is the best way to bring the other to question herself or himself.
So it applies to racialized patients and to racist patients all the same, and it's very important that we could welcome all these conflictual positions.
Yeah.
Okay.